The dust is finally settling for Auburn men's basketball after Steven Pearl steps in as head coach. Where do the Tigers stand after 1 week of practice? Welcome into the Barn Hoops podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hillman, and today we are wrapping up a huge week, a monumentous week in the world of Auburn men's basketball as Bruce Pearl retires on Monday and Steven Pearl is announced as the head coach and introduced on Wednesday in his introductory press conference. Before we dive into today's show, reminder that you can sign up for $25 off an annual subscription to The Barn Auburn at thebarnauburn.com. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, as well as to the YouTube channel, The Barn Auburn Podcast Network, and you can follow all of the content being pushed out at @thebarn_Auburn. But today we are talking about just quite frankly, an insane week for Auburn basketball, and Coach Pearl stepping in, Steven Pearl, that is, stepping into the head coaching role after 11 years on staff under his father, Bruce Pearl. We had the reaction show, myself as well as Kyle Rush, a.k.a. Charlie 5, on Monday. And today we've let the dust settle a little bit, and we are going to kind of break down, one, why there should be a lack of panic. No one should be panicking right now about whether it's roster turnover or any staff changes, as well as why this was the only choice. And really, this first part of the episode, and this might be a long one, but I'm seeing a lot of takes and stories and whatever it is out there about this sudden retirement of Bruce Pearl and the hiring of Steven Pearl. Well, one, if you've been paying attention, if you were locked into this podcast and you watch it and you were a huge Auburn basketball fan, you've known the possibility of Bruce Pearl retiring at really any moment. Did we expect that to happen on Monday? No, we did not. And we obviously even had an episode about this a few weeks ago in regard to Bruce's comments on John Rothstein's podcast, on the Paul Feinbaum show, and in other areas. He's been talking about this for years, and he sat down with Voice of the Tigers, Andy Burcham, on War Eagle Plus about it was his first interview since the retirement, and it's titled "The Final Buzzer," and it was a whole breakdown of this situation. And he mentioned that when John Cohen was hired 3 years ago, and it was over 3 years ago now, that he told him in the first meeting that he doesn't have much longer. He knew that this time was coming and that he wanted to make the most of the few years that he had left. And in that, John Cohen decided to formulate a search, an internal national search, and obviously prepare for that moment as it could happen whenever. And obviously Bruce, he set a deadline for himself for this upcoming season of Sunday. That's when he told John Cohen. That's when John Cohen offered the job to Steven Pearl. The announcement came out Monday. It was leaked to some national reporters before Auburn officially made the statement. And with that, obviously that 3-year search had been ongoing. Whether this decision came on Sunday, whether it came on November 2nd, the day before the season opener against Bethune-Cookman, or it came back in April, the day after the Final Four loss to Florida, I don't think that this would have been any different. The choice would have been Steven Pearl, regardless of when this happened. So there were a lot of discussions about, well, Bruce retired now to force his... No. While yes, maybe that was a consideration so that he could set Steven up for the best success possible in year one, where he's overseeing the offseason into the preseason of getting this team prepared and geared up. This was not solely, well, I have to do this way so that my son could get... No. If he had retired the day after Auburn lost to Florida in the Final Four, Stephen Pearl still would be your head coach this upcoming season. I don't really have much doubt about that. He was the only choice here. And Stephen really, really hit that on the head, I think, in his introductory press conference. We'll talk more about that later in today's episode. But I just saw so many lazy discussion points about this. And I'm going to call one out. And really, it's not just this one, but The Athletic put out an article today. And with the headline, Auburn's Stephen Pearl hiring evokes coach-in-waiting skepticism after much consultation, in parentheses. Well, to that I say The Athletic should have considered all of this when it decided that Auburn was not worth covering back in 2020, when it let go one of Auburn's best beat reporters in Justin Ferguson. And in this, it just shows me how some of the national media is either A, not paying attention, or two, just doesn't care enough to make to have a conversation about how this really is going to go. They're not talking basketball. They're talking personal vendettas or whatever it is, and think that this is the time to do that. No matter. What we need to talk about is Stephen's his resume. And that's how he led off his press conference, which I thought was very impressive, about how he played in the SEC at Tennessee. And he started off his coaching career as an assistant strength and conditioning coordinator before being elevated to a director of basketball operations role, and then eventually the assistant and associate head coach role. A pretty natural progression, if you ask me, for a basketball coach in their career to eventually make that leap to the head coaching position. Yeah, sure. That opportunity in 2014 was probably there because of his father, but to say these things and act like Stephen didn't work his absolute tail off to get to this point, or to grow from the assistant strength and conditioning coach to the director of basketball operations, to being an assistant coach, to being the associate head coach and the defensive coordinator, the guy that Bruce is leaning on every single game to have the defense ready to go against some of the best and most explosive offenses in the country, some of the best offensive players in the nation and in college basketball. It's just, it's really frustrating to see and hear, and especially when you've been paying attention. You know how involved he's been. Stephen was the one that came over and spoke on the Auburn Sports Network post-game, moments after falling in the Final Four, to his good friend Todd Golden. He was the one that had to compose himself and get on the radio with the voice of the Tigers, Andy Burcham, and talk about that just the heartbreaking loss in the Final Four for the second time in 6 years. And he did it with class. He did it extremely well. And then in the offseason, he's the one that releases a statement about Auburn's transition to Nike. He's the one on the Ambush Tour events speaking with Auburn alumni clubs and the Auburn family. This is not something that wasn't calculated. This is something that he has been prepared for. He understands what he's getting into, and he is the man for the job. Obviously, there are games to be played, and there is basketball to be seen before that is really known. But I think what a lot of folks are talking about is outside of that. I don't think anyone is doubting his basketball knowledge, his ability to coach, and his ability to connect with these young guys. This sport is a young man's game now. You look around college basketball, you look at the most recent national champion, you look at the Duke Blue Devils with John Shire, and those are two young head coaches, Todd Golden at Florida, obviously, that have had a lot of success, and I don't think that success is slowing down. Stephen Pearl has a chance to join that elite company. We know that when Kelvin Sampson steps down at Houston, his son Kellen Sampson is going to follow in his footsteps. That's a foregone conclusion. I'll be interested to see if it's the same conversation around the Houston program when that does happen. But for right now, we focus on Auburn, and we focus on the fact that this team, specifically this year, is set up as well as it possibly can be. And Stephen really, I think, settled some concern down in that introductory press conference, specifically about the coaching staff as well as the roster. He, in that press conference, announced that he was promoting Ira Bowman to associate head coach. Ira was not even aware of that until he announced that to the media and the public. And then Matt Gatens was elevated to an assistant coach. He will be on the bench this year after several years at Drake. And then he was the second man at Iowa behind Fran McCaffrey. So Gatens has been a part of the Auburn program prior to his assistant coach's roles in the past half decade. And he is going to bring experience to that bench alongside Ira Bowman, Mike Burgomaster, who was not in attendance on Wednesday because he was out recruiting. He was already on the road recruiting for Stephen Pearl. He was in for a 5-star junior in Tyrone Jamison. And that's the thing. This train is not slowing down whatsoever. That's what's so impressive to me, is that while all of that was going on, this team was still preparing for practice. This team was still out recruiting. This program is in as good of a spot as it can be after a coaching transition, after a Hall of Fame coach retires on the first day of practice. So, as I mentioned, Ira Bowman promoted to associate head coach. Matt Gatens is elevated from that general manager role to a bench and assistant coach. Mike Burgomaster will continue to lead the offense on the bench as an assistant coach. Ira Bowman, as that associate head coach role, he's been the guy with player development as well as keying in on recruiting alongside the other assistant coach, Corey Williams, who's been so instrumental in recruiting for Auburn and player retention. And that's what's so important for this program over the last decade, half decade or so, is that these transfers that Auburn is winning, they're staying for multiple years if possible. If they don't only have 1 year of eligibility, you look at Janai Broom, you look at Denver Jones, you look at Chaney Johnson, you look at Chad Baker-Mazzara. Those guys stayed for multiple years and were keys in making those runs. You even go back to K.D. Johnson and Wendell Green Jr. from that 2022 SEC championship team to the 2023 team that made the NCAA tournament. Walker Kessler would have been a multi-year transfer if he wasn't so dang good and a lottery pick in the NBA draft. So that's why it's so key that this staff sticks together, and why you as an Auburn fan should feel comfortable going into this season and into the next several years. I think that when you look down the line, also, Ian Borders, this offseason was promoted to an assistant coaching role. Maddox Jeffries is still there as the director of basketball operations. Marquise Daniels also assists with player development. And then the rest of the staff as well that might not be on the floor, that's not going to get as much of the praise, is still stuck together. The culture is going to stay the same with this program. Obviously, there will be, it's gonna develop. It's gonna change at some point. But right now, this is not changed a ton. Bruce won't be there every single day, and that's okay, because this staff and these players really understand what the standard is. And that's something that Stephen emphasized in his press conference. The standard is winning championships, and that's not going to change. And that's not going to change with this roster as well, because this roster, as far as we know, is still showing up for practice. Each and every one of those guys that transferred in, all 10 newcomers, are still at practice and still competing their butts off, getting ready for November 3rd against Bethune-Cookman, as well as October 15th against Oklahoma State in the exhibition in Birmingham, October 30th against Memphis in State Farm Arena in Atlanta. The first two opportunities to see the Auburn Tigers under Stephen Pearl. It's going to be really interesting to see how this team, the game plans change, because I think just naturally with the roster changing, even if Bruce Pearl was still the head coach, this was going to be a completely different looking team. We talked about it all offseason, how this team's going to play faster. Coach Pearl confirmed that in his introductory press conference. We're going to see it firsthand in Birmingham against Oklahoma State, and then in Atlanta against Memphis, and then the season will start. But I just think that this roster, when you look at it, again, like I said, as far as we know, everyone's showing up for practice and it's participating. Now, the fear of someone like a Tahaad Pettiford, who is obviously going to be one of the best players in the SEC. He's going to contend for SEC Player of the Year. That's a valuable asset for a team that might lack at point guard. But we're so far into the semester. So how would any of these guys become eligible elsewhere? I don't know. How many of these rosters, how many of these teams have a scholarship available? Not many. So where would they go? That's the thing here is this roster, I think, is going to come together over this and become another great Auburn team. Might not be a championship winning team. Who knows? We still have so much to learn about them. We have so much to learn about Keyshawn Hall and Keyshawn Murphy and Filip Jovic and Elijah Freeman and Abdul Bashir and Caden Magwood, Sebastian Williams-Adams and Simon Walker and so on and so on. Emeka Oporum, that there's no way to project yet where this team will finish until we see some action. I think it'll be really interesting at SEC Media Days here in a couple of weeks. That'll take place in the middle of October. One, who Auburn takes. Obviously, Stephen Pearl will be there. Will be 2 or 3 players. It's likely Tahaad Pettiford and one more. Keyshawn Hall, maybe. And just the attitude there. And then finally, where does the media expect Auburn to finish? I would be shocked if the media selects Auburn to finish in the top 5 of the SEC. I think Auburn will probably be selected 6th, 7th, maybe 8th in the SEC, which would just be how it is. Even if Bruce Pearl was still the head coach, I still don't think Auburn will be selected in the top 5. I think Auburn will be selected right there at 6, maybe 5, with the new roster, 10 newcomers. But it'll be really interesting to see what the outlook is for this team on a national scale. Obviously, I just talked about how I don't think many of them are paying enough attention to this program to understand why Stephen Pearl was the only choice to be the one to follow up his father, Bruce Pearl. But we'll see what they think about this team going into the 25 to 26 season. So obviously, if updates continue to flow in for practice, then we're going to keep that up and we'll talk about, who's participating, who's not, who might not be there, whatever it is. But as far as we know right now, everything is business as usual, and Stephen Pearl is leading that charge. So why do I say this was a winning presser? And that is such a cliche in the sports world after, anytime a coach is hired and they go and speak to the media and are introduced by their athletic director. Well, I think it's very important here because going back to the fact that Stephen was the only choice for this job, who in the world would have had a chance at winning the press conference other than Stephen Pearl in this situation? I don't know. I really don't know if anybody could have come in and won the press conference. Maybe Todd Golden. You're not poaching Todd Golden after he wins the national championship at Florida. But I think he would have been the only one that could have come in and really set the tone for Auburn basketball going forward, and everyone would back him. And that's the positive. While I've seen some concern from the Auburn family over the last few days, I've seen an overwhelming amount of support as well for Stephen, for Bruce, for this team going forward. And that's the most important thing. Let me tell you, if you think it's been difficult to find a ticket into Neville Arena over the past several years, it's just going to get more difficult because this program is going to continue to rise. But I mentioned Stephen emphasizing the standard and the expectations. He was asked about this in his introductory press conference on Wednesday. And he said winning championships and had a footnote. Since 2017, every single transfer to come into Auburn has won an SEC title. That is the Auburn basketball standard. You go back to 2018, that 2017 to 2018 season, and Auburn is projected to go 4-14 in the league. And that's when Bruce shows up at that shoot-around in Knoxville in early January before the first SEC competition for the Tigers, wearing that 4-14 shirt. Auburn goes on to go 13-5 and wins the SEC championship for the first time since 1999. And that really set the foundation for Bruce Pearl and his program. That team the next year, not the best regular season, didn't win the SEC regular season title, but caught fire in March, winning the SEC tournament title, taking down the Blue Bloods in the NCAA tournament, and making its first ever Final Four. Then a couple of years go by that, one, you have the SEC tournament canceled due to COVID. Then you have the odd year where Sharif Cooper's is not eligible, and he is, and then he gets hurt, and plenty of other injuries in that season. And the next year, with full arenas again, the Jungle's rocking. Jabari Smith, the incredible freshman out of Atlanta. Then you have the transfer Walker Kessler, leads Auburn to another SEC title. Then you go on to 2024. It keeps going. We know the last 2 years what happened with Janai Barum and the rest of that roster. And that's the thing is Keyshawn Murphy, Keyshawn Hall, Filip Jovic, Abdul Bashir, so on. They expect to contend and win an SEC title because that's what you should expect when you come to Auburn. And that is due to Bruce Pearl and this staff over the last 11 years really setting the standard, not just in the SEC, but in the nation. And I think there's a lot of discussion about how the SEC started to care about basketball because of what Bruce and this staff did. I think you talk about, what NIL. Auburn made the Final Four before NIL was a thing. 2 years before that, in fact. So that just goes to show how important Bruce Pearl was to Auburn and how important Auburn basketball was to the SEC. And that's why it's going to continue to be successful. Stephen also talked about, he was asked about the differences from Bruce and BP and how he is going to kind of change the tune. How is he going to follow in his father's footsteps? How the passion of Bruce Pearl is what everyone points to when talking about how awesome he is. And we know that very well. Coach Pearl, he's going to be in Texas A&M. He's going to be in College Station tomorrow for the Auburn football game. And he's going to be getting the crowd fired up. We know that. And he says, I'm going to have to be a little more subtle with my approach with our guys, which is very interesting. If you've ever seen Steven in a game and in a practice, he is an intense guy. He is very fiery. He's very passionate. He gets it from his father. But I think he understands that he will have to take a step back sometimes and relate to these guys, these kids, that it happens, and use it as a teaching moment and do it that way instead of the way his father's done it, because he's earned that respect after 30 plus years of coaching in a Hall of Fame career. That Steven has, that he understands himself that he has to earn that respect. Not that these players don't respect him, but there's a certain level of respect that comes with that kind of tenure and being able to be that upfront with your guys. Doesn't mean he's going to hold anything back in his coaching, just he's going to do it in a different way than Bruce Pearl ever did. Obviously, I think that this was kind of the part of the press conference I realized, okay, he's getting comfortable and he's ready for this moment. And we know that Bruce is a character. He is an awesome person, and really getting to know him over the last 6 years has been incredible. Being a student, being a president of the Jungle, being a part of the Auburn Sports Network, I've gotten to interact with Bruce, and he is a comedic person. He just loves to have fun. And even in these past 6 years, Steven, he's filled in at times on Tiger Talk. He's filled in, as we mentioned, in those media availabilities and whatnot. And not really seen that side of Steven quite yet. He's always all business when he comes in and speaks on Tiger Talk. And he is a wealth of basketball knowledge. And I learn something new every time he speaks with us. And I thought it was funny when he brought up that he would not be as active as his father on Twitter now that he's the head coach, shouting out the athletic director, John Cohen, the president, Chris Roberts. And then he mentioned Bruce's his outgoing approach with students, going in the cafeteria and encouraging them to come to games. And then obviously the famous video photo of him shirtless at the Tennessee Lady Vols game with Pat Summitt as the head coach. And Stephen called out the women's basketball head coach at Auburn, Larry Vickers, and said, don't get any ideas. And those are the kinds of things that you never really got to see with Stephen kind of in the background as the associate head coach. Like I said, he made his media appearances, but he was all business as usual. But I think he's going to come out of the shell a little bit, and he's going to be a lot more like Bruce than many think. And that's going to be really fun to watch him grow like that. So this has really been a wild, tumultuous week for Auburn basketball, and I understand that you feel uneasy if you're a fan. That was something I thought about on Tuesday after things had settled down from Monday. What was going through my mind was how the last time this happened was 11 years ago, and the Auburn family couldn't be more excited to have a new head coach. Truly couldn't be, because how poorly the last decade had gone for the program. And that breath of fresh air from Bruce Pearl was so exciting and so encouraging. And then obviously Monday happens, and it is all of a sudden, we like I said, we discussed this, how it was going to come sooner rather than later. Didn't expect it to come that soon. And that's why it whoa, slow down time. And it's a completely different mindset. You're going to a new head coach, and it's a little scary because you're so comfortable with the last guy you had, and he's done it for 11 years, and you barely even remember the last time the arena was empty. And again, I think Stephen Pearl is the only guy for the job. I think that he really impressed in that opening press conference, and the fact that the staff is sticking together, the roster seems to be sticking together, it is proof for optimism. And whether or not this team goes out and wins 25 games this year or whatever it is and gets a top 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, contends for the SEC title, that remains to be seen. And this might be a longer journey than that. That's the key to remember, is this is not a one-season thing. Stephen signed a 5-year deal with Auburn to be its head coach. And that's something that I think is really cool, to have that kind of stability with this program, that you know that a guy that has been a part of the foundation and then the build up from that is a part of the program, as well as so many other guys that were. And they're sticking with Auburn and going to help Auburn be the best that it possibly can be for a few years. So that probably was sounding a lot really preachy for quite a bit. But again, just with everything kind of settling down, we're settling into practice. Here's the thing. We're going to start seeing the media availabilities, and there's going to be no talk about the coaching change or anything. It's going to be all ball. We're going to be talking basketball here in the next few weeks and real games on October 15th against Oklahoma State at Beltwell Auditorium in Birmingham, and then in State Farm Arena against Memphis on October 30th. And then the real deal, tip-off on the Plains, November 3rd, Bethune-Cookman, Neville Arena. There's probably going to be a banner unveiling for the last Final Four. That's the thing. It's going to be a lot of fun, guys. Looking forward to this entire season on the Barn Hoops podcast and everything that's to come with Stephen Pearl as the head coach of the Auburn men's basketball team. But be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, wherever you listen to your podcast, and everywhere, because it's not just basketball content, it's football content as well. Obviously, after Auburn football was robbed in Norman last week, that was discussed heavily on the Top Button podcast with Kyle Rush, a.k.a. Charlie 5, as well as Village Vice with Zach Blackerby and Brad Law. So they'll have all of the breakdown every single week this season. So tomorrow, Auburn heads to College Station for another top 10 SEC matchup against Texas A&M. If the Tigers win that one, look out Georgia in a few weeks. So we'll have all the coverage right here at the Barn Auburn Podcast Network. Make sure you sign up now at thebarnauburn.com and subscribe, hit that like button, whatever it is, the notification bell, so that you're notified every time we drop some content right here at the Barn Auburn Network. Once again, thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Barn Hoops Podcast.